On today's Locked On Angels, all right, 29th in MLB. That's where the Angels have been ranked in their farm system. So let's have an honest conversation. Do the Angels have a development problem?
You are Locked On Angels, your daily Los Angeles Angels podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Locked On Angels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Steve Granado. Thanks for making us your first listen of the day. On today's show, again, we're going to be talking about this problem. The Angels are ranked 29th as according to Baseball America as far as their farm system is concerned, nearly dead last in Major League Baseball. So we asked back former host of the show, Taylor Blake Ward, to talk all about it. He has the inside track. He is very well versed and knows all about this kind of stuff. So we have him on today. So let's jump right to that. Let's talk, do the Angels have a farm problem? Taylor Blake Ward, prospect guru here and the author of In Search of Millionaires. Taylor, how you doing today, man?
I'm good, Steve. How you doing?
I'm doing great, man. Glad to have you back on the show and talk a little bit about what's going on in the Angels farm system. Let's start with the latest news. Came out just a day or so ago, 2 days ago. The Baseball America rankings, putting the Angels almost dead last, 29th farm system in Major League Baseball once again, bringing up the rear. Initial reactions to that.
I think it's fair. You do look at the Angels farm system. There's a lot of upside, a lot of athleticism, but not much of that has really come to fruition. You don't have really many impact players. Obviously, Reed Detmer's the cream of the crop. Sam Bachman has impact, but there's a lot of guys that just have so many question marks. So when you only have 2, 3, 4, 5 impact players projected, it's not that great a farm system. I think it's a common theme that we talk about top 30 prospects, but no organization really has 30 impact prospects. You're talking about a lot of projects, and that's kind of what the Angels have is a lot of guys. You talk about the Angels farm system and you talk about prospect ABC, XYZ, whatever it is, and you say, okay, maybe they can grow into a role player, or maybe they are a reliever, and there's not a lot of starting upside. There's not a lot of impacts, everyday, regular upside. It's a lot of guys that, and also the performance was down this year for quite a few guys. Some guys had great years, but a lot of the top prospects, quote unquote, had down years.
So what a lot of people have kind of been talking about on Twitter, I've seen in response to this, is nothing really outside of the top 3. You mentioned Detmers, Sam Bachman up there, and then Kyron Paris is also up there as far as guys that are kind of starting to make a little bit of waves in the Angels system. So I wanted to bring this up. As far as like developmental, right? You look at the cream of the crop right now, and the teams that are up the top. You think the Seattle Mariners. You always think the Dodgers are up there. Of course, the Detroit Tigers. There are other factors at play, but I want to kind of take the Dodgers in particular. Is there a difference in organizational philosophies between the Dodgers and the Angels when you're thinking of maybe not necessarily drafting or signing guys, but just developing guys?
I think we're a bit too early in Perry Manassian's regime to get a full grasp of this. But you look at things, and you and I were talking about it before we came on, is Angels have not developed a hitter, excluding 2 or 3 surprises in the last half decade, roughly. I mean, you have Brandon Marsh, you have Joe Adell, these premier prospects that are starting to come forward, and you have Jared Walsh and David Fletcher, who kind of outperform their prospect status, as I guess how you would put it. But the Angels have not done a great job developing position player wise, which is very unique. I think that I'm a big fan of Billy Epler, always have been, but I think there was for a period of time almost a one size fits all kind of development pattern. And I can't speak true to that because it's only from my own eyes and I'm not a part of the organization. But that was kind of the sense that I got. And I think that that's a problem. I think the Dodgers handle everything by a case-by-case situation. I think that they're very heavy into, obviously, the analytics with the Dodgers, but at the same time, a lot of their draft picks are very traditional to, we're looking at the tools, we're looking at the athleticism, we're looking at the ability to throw strikes and things like this. So there is a lot to development that I feel like, if I'm being real honest with you, I don't know. I was never a coach or at a higher level, even to the high school point level. I haven't even been there. So development is a very challenging thing, but I think that has to be your focus. I think that when you're building an organization, scouting and development is your primary asset outside of possibly money for free agency. The Angels clearly have one of those down very well when it comes to the money side. But when it comes to scouting and developing, I think there are questions, reasonably so. And I think that they have made, I think another problem is there's a lot of movement in the last half decade, multiple professional scouting directors, multiple amateur scouting directors. And that does come with different regimes. But I think that once you find a little stability, you're going to see some growth. One name I will throw in there, and you talked about the top three in the organization with Kyron Paris, Sam Bachman, Reed Detmers. I would throw Errol Vera into that. Shortstop, very young, a lot of time before we see what he is, but I think that there is some projection there to an everyday kind of player.
It's the new year, so that means New Year's resolutions. If yours is about getting fit or eating healthier, make sure you include Built Bar in your plan. Built Bar makes it easier to stick to your resolution because it tastes so good, you'll actually want to eat it, unlike those other gross, chalky, waxy, chemically protein bars, right? Here's an idea. Try this out. Go to all your secret treat stashes at home, in your pantry, at the office, the car, wherever you sneak those little snacks. Throw out all those sugary or calorie-filled treats and replace them with Built Bars. So when you're craving a snack or a treat, you can reach for something that's healthy and actually tastes incredible. Here's what most Built Bars have: 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, only 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. We got a promo code for you. Go to Built.com, use the promo code LOCKED15, and get 15% off your order. It's that simple. Promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. You brought up Walsh and Fletcher. I want to take the conversation there now, Taylor. Those are guys that weren't projected, right? They are not the big flashy names that you're waiting for. And that happens in baseball, obviously. There are guys that outperform. I mean, these are, maybe they're not top prospects, but they are all talented ball players throughout, all way more talented than us. That's not that hard, but to be of note. So how likely is it to see guys like that get to the majors and outperform like that? Because, like you said, it's not really happening for the Angels outside of these very few cases. But again, to piggyback off the Dodgers, or even look at the Cubs, some teams that just kind of randomly find these guys and develop them, and then they turn into these studs at the majors. Like, how odd is that, and how come the Angels don't do it more often, I guess?
I think it's a case-by-case scenario. You look at David Fletcher himself. Scouts always liked David Fletcher. It's just, what kind of impact is he going to have? Because he doesn't hit for a lot of power. He's got a good glove. He's probably not going to be a shortstop, which he's not. And the power has not come. He's not a power hitter. He's a contact hitter. So it's, in today's game, when we look at the tools, those are knocks. So his prospect status, he doesn't hit for power. He's not a shortstop, blah, 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 all these things. Those are knocks. So his prospect status is going to drop. He has definitely outperformed, I think, what scouts believe, but I believe a lot of people said, this guy could be an everyday player for a few years, and then he's going to fit into a role position, which is kind of what we're seeing right now. Jared Walsh was a very interesting case. He was a pitcher at college, got hurt, and I got a text from one of his college teammates the day he got drafted, and someone said, "Hey, this guy can hit. Like, you got to watch him. He can hit." So when you start seeing him, you really believe in it. And then the adjustment that he made in 2020 at the end of, through the camp and everything, we don't know what coach it was, but you look at his hands and the way that things transitioned for him, and the simple adjustment that he made, quieting his load, it changed the player that dramatically, which is, it could be the player, it could be development. We still don't have a real detail on that. But it does change. And like you said, all these guys, remarkably talented baseball players, it's what's going to change to turn this player into a scenario of this. How many 39th round picks have made the majors? It's not a lot. So Jared Walsh is very much a peculiar case. David Fletcher. I always want to say Eckstein, which for obvious reasons, but
Yeah.
David Fletcher is a case in his own self as to the tools just were not sexy tools. Even in college, they weren't sexy tools. So to build off that to become an everyday player, it's unique. So yeah, maybe you do take a chance on an undersized guy who doesn't hit for power, but does have contact, contactability, whatever, a hit tool, a good hit tool, and things like this. So it's a peculiar case by case scenario. Those two guys, you can kind of establish where things went right or where things went different. But development's not easy. You and I have talked about this. To find an everyday shortstop, how many everyday shortstops are there in the majors? It's not 30. There's 30 clubs, but it's not 30. How many legitimate starting pitchers does each organization have in their farm system? It's not a lot, maybe one or two. Some, maybe three. If it's the Dodgers, they've got 20, but whatever, that's the Dodgers. But, development's real hard. And you look at the teams that are good at developing, the Rays, the Yankees, and the Dodgers, they seem to be doing pretty well for themselves.
So let's go back to the Baseball America stuff here. So again, 29th system ranked most recently. Seattle at the top. So when you think of how the Angels' trajectory over the same time here for the Mariners, right? Let's compare them to the Mariners right now. The Mariners, for a very long time, have not been very good, right? Until most recently of last year. The Angels have been middling. So I know that this can bring up a whole conversation about tanking, which is what I don't want to get into because that's way too messy, and philosophically way too messy. But for the Mariners and the Angels, who have had, for all intents and purposes, the same amount of success over the last decade, right? In theory, because they haven't really won anything. It doesn't really matter where you finished in the pack in the AL West, but they've had the same amount of success, quote unquote. Is it the system, like the system of drafting and rewarding tanking, quote unquote, that has allowed the Mariners to build it up? Or was it Jerry Dipoto building that up and allowing that to become more of a thing and getting that farm system strong?
It's a great question. I mean, you look at the top of the Mariners system, you've got Jared Kelenic, who came over in a trade. The Mariners did use trade chips. Shocker, Jerry Dipoto trade. But Jared Kelenic, obviously one of the top prospects in baseball, or I don't know about his prospect status at the moment off the top of my head, but top 10 guy, whatever. And he came from a trade, which I think another guy where the hit, the tools have really impacted his prospect status because the kid can hit, he can hit for power, and maybe he doesn't stay up the middle, but when you perform and do things like that, it does merit success. And Julio Rodriguez, Noelvi Marte, for whatever reason off the top of my mind, I'm not remembering, but best kid I saw last year, best non-major league prospect that I saw last year. Maybe it does start down in the lower levels. Maybe it's Arizona or even the Dominican. They spent a lot of money to get Noelvi Marte and Julio Rodriguez. And maybe it's international scouting is a big part of that there could be questions. Comparing the two, I think it's, if I'm being real honest, lack of knowledge for myself between, comparing apples to oranges a little bit or apples to apples, whatever it is. But clearly, whether it be the money spent on the international front or your amateur department in general, bringing in these much more talented players to what is your professional staff, talking about Jared, coming over in a trade, those are things that they can have an impact. So you have to really focus on your scouting department. And I think Jerry Dipoto, for a guy that kind of does have I think publicly a lack of trust in certain things, understandably, has put a lot of trust into these guys. And I think that there's an establishment of that trust that's really helping. And that could be something that, there's always going to be questions when it comes to the Angels. There's always going to be questions. How much is ownership stepping up? We looked at 20 draft picks for the Angels last year, 20 pitchers. The Angels need pitchers. That's not necessarily how you get pitchers, but it can help. So how much is ownership stepping in? There's a lot of gray area. It's not a black and white thing that's as simple as that. There's a lot of gray area, and figuring out what that gray area is can be very challenging. And if I'm being real honest with you, I don't know if I have a deep enough comprehension of that gray area between the two clubs to really give you something.
This episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before as football continues its march through the playoffs right to the big game in just over a week. BetOnline.net remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just football. BetOnline has up-to-the-minute info on pro and college hoops, NHL, boxing, UFC, along with live real-time updates of current games. Don't wait to take advantage of all the new amazing offers available for the 2022 season. BetOnline, where the game starts. You brought up the international market. Let's talk about that. The Angels have not had a ton of international success. They've had a couple of guys that have, kind of peeked through and have been able to get to the majors and are hoping to contribute in 2022. But when you look elsewhere, you look at other teams and what they've been able to do throughout Major League Baseball. They have been able to get the international guys. The guys in Latin America have been able to absolutely take over the game. So do the Angels have an international scouting problem?
I don't know. I think that clearly they were out of the international market for a long period of time because of the Roberto Baldacchini signing. That they really handcuffed them for a long time. But when they came back, they did go and target these upside athletes. It started with Trent DeVoe and Deshaun Knowles, and those guys have not really, blossomed, especially Trent DeVoe. The hit tool is just not there. And when it comes to Deshaun Knowles, we're still figuring out what he is, but maybe a fourth outfielder, which I think he signed for $800,000. Fourth outfielder, fifth outfielder is not a bad deal when you go for that price. Then you kind of look at the years after that. You've got Nelson Rada, Errol Vera, someone I mentioned, Nelson Rada this year, Randy DeJesus this year, guys that we're still figuring out what it is. But it seems like there is a transition from athlete to a guy with a hit tool. You look at Denzer Guzman from the year prior, is the hit tool is the focus. And you look at what the Braves did when Perry was there. Ronald Acuna signed for, I think, $30,000, something, 10, 30, 300,000, whatever it was. The biggest thing with the Braves was get guys that have a good hit tool and maybe some athleticism, and we'll figure it out. I think when it comes to position players, hitting is the hardest thing to do. So if you have that ability at a young age, there's a blessing in disguise there, an ability to throw strikes. We can teach velocity nowadays. It's surprising to me because I can't suddenly throw 90 miles per hour, but we can teach velocity. So the ability to throw strikes, the ability to spin a curveball or a breaking ball or whatever it is, that is challenging. Another thing when it comes to the Angels, and this has nothing to do with their own fault, is I've had this conversation before is, how many Real Madrid jerseys do you see in the United States and how many PSG and Manchester United as opposed to Leeds FC? I'm spitting out like the most random European soccer team, but when you go down to the Dominican or you go anywhere worldwide, you're going to see Yankees hats. You're going to see Dodgers hats. If you go to Cuba and Puerto Rico, you're going to see Miami Marlins hats, big market. And not that Anaheim's not a big market, but these kids want to play for the best clubs and they want to play for the World Series champion. It's, I'm going to go sign with the Washington Nationals because Juan Soto is there and they won the World Series. And the Atlanta Braves just won the World Series. They've got Ronald Acuna, and the Dodgers are the Dodgers and the Yankees are the Yankees. And Miami's the closest team to me, and I get to go home in the wintertime and everything. That is an advantage the Angels do not have, is they do not have this mass popularity, despite having two of the most exciting players in the game and arguably two of the best players in the game. That impact does not really come. So there are potentially in-house flaws, such as what is going on in the scouting with the Angels on the international side, and also, something that they just cannot handle, and that's competing with the Yankees worldwide on a popularity scale.
Yeah, that's an interesting point you bring up there, because you think about, the kids that you're signing are 15, 16, 17 years old. So the Angels don't have success for 10 years or so since the last good crop for the Halos, in the early 2010s. Those kids' entire lives, essentially, the Angels have been middling or below, right? So since they were 5 years old, the Angels haven't really done anything. They've played 3 playoff games, or whatever the case may be.
You keep in mind the Angels from you and I have talked about it in the book. We talk about it is, in the 90s and early 2000s, ownership didn't want to spend on the international market. I think Ramon Ortiz was the biggest international signing the Angels made for a long time, and he signed for $3,000. I think Frankie Rodriguez was something similar too. But you look at, 02 to 2010, you get Juan Rivera and a bunch of international players. And like I said, success is a huge thing, the way that you're pointing out. The Angels, they have success when it comes to Mike Trout and Shohei Ohtani, but outside of that, they do not have that on-field success that it really merits, hey, I want to go join this club, because it's not, I want to fix this club. It's, I want to go be a part of that club.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to ask you one more here, try and wrap this up with a pretty bow and make everybody happy at the end. Yes, the numbers don't look good, right? The 29th ranking, only 2 in the top 100 from Keith Law, 1 outside of it. All those things can feel sour for Angels fans. We had a whole minor league week. We talked to every minor league broadcaster, but for you personally, what you have seen, you can be a little more objective. Is there hope in the Angels farm system?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to develop. And that's going to be the biggest focus for all these kids is can you get one of these kids to be a starting pitcher, an impact starting pitcher? Obviously, Reed Detmers is what he is, but can you go beyond Reed Detmers and Chris Rodriguez? I think another part of the ranking system is Joe Adell and Brandon Marsh and Chris Rodriguez and Griffin Canning have all graduated. They're not prospects, so you can't really include them, but they do have a young core. You add Luis Rengifo to that and David Fletcher to that. They have a young core in a sense, so it's not like there's all hope is lost kind of thing. But you and I, you got to see Ryan Costiu Inland Empire this year. I think he's fantastic, but he's a reliever. So yeah, the Angels have plenty of relievers on the way. It's how many are going to become whatever they are. Is it all middle relievers? Is one going to be a closer? Maybe that is Sam Bachman, whatever. But they've got plenty of pitching help internally. It's just they're still a year or 2 or 3 or 4 away. And when it comes to the position player side, I think there's a lot of questions. There are kids that I really do like that I think are maybe underrated when it comes to prospects. Edgar Carroll, I'm not going to say he's anywhere near a top 100 prospect at this moment. I wouldn't even say he's a top 400 prospect at this point. But, the comparisons that I'm getting are Omar Narvaez, which – the Angels need a catcher, right? They need a catcher down the road. Omar Narvaez is not a bad catcher. He's a middling average catcher, but at least you have that potentially in your system. Errol Vera, we mentioned Kyron Paris. Jordan Adams is small steps away. Jordan Adams added a few things to his swing this year. He's got a new wrap. It's called a power wrap or a power tip that he was working on and trying to struggle through that. So there's development, and it's making sure that development program does work for these kids. But I think there's upside. It's just, can that upside come? And I mean, I know there's a lot of conversation about Jack Kachanowicz at the moment because he struggled mightily. Very bad season for him this year. His curveball is predictable, even though it's a great pitch. His fastball can flatten out at times. There's a lot of questions, but there is hope. It's just a lot of upside hope. So take it with a grain of salt, obviously. But, like I said, the 29th ranking, it does make a lot of sense. It does make a lot of sense. But next year, with 3 or 4 prospects doing what they're supposed to do and development doing what they're supposed to do, suddenly this becomes a top, 20 farm system or top 15 farm system. So there is upside. There's a lot of gambling that's going to take place. But there's still hope. There's still hope. Just, I think, cautiously optimistic hope.
Yeah, well, you definitely factor into that they'll probably go to a more conventional draft in 2022 where it's not just all pitching, where you'll get some guys and go to the NCAA ranks and find some high school kids. And, there is hope. I agree with you. It's not all love lost. It's not the end of the world. And it's a game. It's baseball. Everything's going to be all right. Taylor Blake-Ward, thanks for joining us today, man.
Absolutely, buddy. Thanks.
All right, my many thanks to Taylor Blake Ward for joining us today and giving us an insight to the Angels farm system. You can buy his book. It is linked in the episode description. Really cool. It's all about the Angels, and we had a whole conversation about that earlier. I'll also leave a link to that episode if you're curious about a chat about his book with the book or the guy that the book is about. It's all in the episode description. We'll talk to you next week, guys. I'm Steve Granado. Later.